Welcome to the Performance Formula with Jody Martins.
Right, Russell, between moving to New Jersey in the US and you being busy with your things, it's taken us a little bit more than a month to get back together and continue our spirited cricket conversations. And I think what I love most about, maybe just at the outset here, what I love most about my interactions with you is, one, how similar we think about things, and the fact that we both have lives separate from, say, these podcast conversations, yet we keep finding our way back to each other to bounce ideas, share some insights from the game that we've learned, and maybe even beyond the game, and how that influences our thinking about the game. And yeah, so I'm excited to continue this conversation with you. I know that we said at the sort of back end of the previous conversation, so for the people that are following along, that will unpack the practices, but that'll definitely happen. Maybe not in this conversation. We thought it pertinent to delve into a different direction, just in the immediacy of the moment, and then we'll get back to those maybe in the next conversation or two away, something like that. How have you been? And what have you been up to? And where's life at for you? We made the big move to the other side of the big blue pond.
Yeah, no, lovely to hear that there's been massive progression. And mine is not as dramatic as yours, but there's been a lot of new changes, a lot of progression, and a lot of things that are shifting. I've started lecturing courses now, so that's been interesting.
Brilliant.
Used to doing the facilitation in front of teams, but now with students on board, that's kind of a new dynamic to step into the education side of things. But yeah, it's always good to have new experiences, and it broadens your horizon in a way, just like I imagine your family would have experienced now moving in a different environment. So
Yeah,
it's been
and
good.
it is. Yeah, and it's completely different. Yeah, everything is different, from driving to the other side of the road to the people to the way things work. Some things are so far advanced, some things are so far behind, even compared to a place like South Africa. So yeah, cool new experiences. So we've been on this topic of teaming, right? Champion teaming. And I think all of our conversations in this series is sort of slowly built up to this idea. And in particular, I think between you and me, we've realized that there's this idea that we need to focus a little bit more on ownership, what that means and what the impacts are of that and how that plays out from a performance point of view. So I'm happy that you sort of set the stage for us, and then we'll get into the nitty gritty of it.
Yeah, let's jump in 2 feet, Jody. I'm looking forward to this conversation because I believe that, a lot of the times what tends to happen is ownership kind of rears its head at a point where we don't really want it to, right? It can kind of surprise us because we assume that players, particularly professional players or people, even if they're coming into the game with some form of passion, that they would take ownership. You know what I mean? It's almost an assumed concept in a sense. But yet people don't necessarily mature in their ownership. So therefore, when we spoke last about culture, I think this is why I wanted to introduce the concept of ownership as a focus point, because I think a lot of people understand that it plays a major role in how culture is shaped, but they don't necessarily understand how to firstly recognize it and then also accelerate it to advance it in a way so that you can get those peak performances, right? So this is why I think just today's topic in and of itself, if we can just focus on ownership, I'm sure there'll be huge values to coaches all around, because I don't think they've even actually understood it firstly and dissected it into its components so that we can actually apply ourselves appropriately. So that's why, in a nutshell, we've with Semco style, it's something that breathed life into this concept, which really just opened my eyes and allowed me to understand that something as vague or something as abstract, intangible nature of ownership can actually be defined in two terminologies, right? And we'll be unpacking today the maturity grid, the ownership maturity grid of Semco style a little bit further. So I suppose we can go straight into it if you want, or are you happy to have that definition?
Well, I maybe have one thought, right? And you know me, I always come from like the individual side. I think you come more from the team side. So when I think of the idea of ownership, my thoughts immediately go to like, I own something, like there's a cup on my desk. This is my cup, I can say it's mine. I own it. This is my cell phone, my laptop, my podcast for all we know. And so I'm curious to see where your thinking goes with that from a team point of view. Like I think from an individual point of view, for me, normally it's an easy concept to make people aware of. However, at the same time, I find that ownership, like I wrote you, it's like low key. It's this thing that we don't pay attention to much. Like I think most of the things you and I speak about, it's things that really, really, really influence performance. And yet we hardly ever speak about it. You hardly ever hear people sort of mention it. It's not a big talking point necessarily. But I remember years and years and years ago working with a cricketer who was in I'll give a little bit of the details. He was playing for like the Gauteng Strikers, actually the jacket I've got on. He was playing for the Gauteng Strikers, and he was sort of in and out the Lions team, which was at that point in time in South Africa, we had the franchise system. And the biggest struggle for him was that whenever he went to the Lions, he never felt at home. He never felt like he was part of the team. He always felt as like a bit of an outsider. So my sense was he could never like feel like he belongs. He never had a like, I belong in my clothes, right? I belong in my shoes because they're mine. And so I think there's this really important puzzle to the, there's this really important puzzle to the formula of performance, so as to speak, that this is potentially a missing link for a lot of athletes and certainly teams, as we're going to discuss here, is that this ability to feel like I'm part of something requires a sense of ownership, that it is mine, and so that's my 2 cents here at the start, but I'm curious to see where you go just with it from a team point of view.
Yeah, that's a wonderful reminder, Jody. I think we spoke about this before when we spoke about the interpersonal nature of things, right? Where you're coming from the individual point of view. And if you don't feel like you've owned your space, or you're coming into a space and you own your domain inside a team, you won't feel fully there. You won't feel like you fit in and you slot in a way, right?
Yeah.
So ownership is actually challenged in a way. So that's the interpersonal kind of component. And your skills will go out the door. You may have all the skills, but because you're not fitting into the space well, or you're not fitting into your role well, it gets internally challenged. And people kind of have a sense that. So they're kind of like, it's a make or break dynamic, actually, to be honest. The level of your ownership will determine the level of your outcomes. So it's all about the sense of inner ownership, the inner capacity of I have something, and then that can find expression outwardly. So what you're referring to there is that intrapersonal type of experience, and we don't speak about it, and therefore it's kind of goes over our head, or it's kind of oblivious for the most part. And then the second, obviously, aspect of what you refer to, we might go into with teaming, is the interpersonal one, where the team actually has a certain way of doing things, and you naturally come in and try to find your way by kind of aligning with the team's values or the team's vision or whatever it is, right? And now you feel is as if this team, whatever this team's sense is your sense too, and how you kind of engage with one another. So you feel like you're playing a part of influence on the team, and vice versa, you're accepting the influence the team has on you. So that ownership dynamic is that interplay. So therefore, interpersonal play between yourself and your teammates and the team itself. And if you don't have that strong, like that sense of ownership, like I belong here, then that psychological safety is not there. And therefore, your performances won't necessarily be there. Over time, it will start being suppressed and actually sabotaged to some extent. So those are the type of things that we're talking about here when we break up what I call that maturity index, the maturity grid, that we have this modality to base it on, which is awesome because it gives us a practical framework to kind of assess these abstract concepts, right? And it makes these conversations easier, particularly for people who have the sense of it, right? I feel a little bit lost. I feel a little bit out of it. The shoes is not fitting me. I need to find a better space, maybe a better position to play. Am I even wanted here? All those dynamics, right? So at least when we break down this maturity guide, I'm hoping that actually allows us to have further dialogue, or at least more mature reflection on what this thing ownership actually entails, and how strongly it links to performances, right? And how strongly it links to that inner champion and our collective championing as a team.
Yeah. Yeah. So my question to you is, as you were talking there, I thought, you speak of maturity and this maturity grid. Like, what is that really? How does, I had a great question in my head and it just disappeared. So my question might come back as it tends to. But I feel a little bit silly because I feel like I've got this question. I'm going to ask it. But you see, this is, and maybe this is a good example, right? I don't know. Is that in a moment this became important to me, and we're talking about this idea of the interpersonal skills, and I think that's where my question was positioned. It was based around these ideas and sort of the team being the team being important, me being important, and me getting lost in a team versus me contributing to a team. And now I'm not asking a great question around it, but I think that's sort of the little puzzle pieces of that was the puzzle pieces that my head was sort of pulling together into an idea to then ask a question, which has now completely gone out the window. So I think maybe to take the conversation forward, if my question comes back, I'll write it down this time. I won't just try and remember it. But if maybe let's get into the model, right? Like what that is and how that plays out, because I think that might start showing the things that I had a question about that I'm not so sure about.
Sure, no problem. Yeah, I think also in conversation, as you converse and you kind of just allow yourself just to ease into it, oftentimes what's important to you will kind of resurface. It will find its way through conversation. So it's the same thing what we're talking about here now. When ownership is not quite there, once you understand this modality, you'll be able to see and assess exactly where you are placed positionally. And it's a self-assessment, right? Because you got a sense of, no, this is exactly where it is. So once we have this discussion, I'm sure for the sake of the viewers, you'll have this grid put up, in the corners here, and people can have a view of it. But let's just run down. There's two components to ownership. If I break it apart and dissect it, it's simply to the degree of participation and to the degree of commitment. Those are the two components that will determine how mature you are in your level of ownership, right? Now, this is individual ownership and collective team ownership. So we're going to just put it all together and just call it ownership maturity. You can see how these things overlap, and it becomes both. It becomes both your interpersonal stuff, as well as your interpersonal components. So those two dynamics is the thing at play. So as you increase in your level, so if you think about it in that grid, right, on the X and Y quadrant, the level of expansion of your commitment and the level of expansion of your participation within the game or in the team, that will give you up into the right experiences, right? And that's what we're all after. We're looking for up into the right experiences, right? Where we feel like we're more and more and more committed, and we're participating more and more and more, and we're making our contribution as a result of it, right? So that for me is how you measure ownership. Now, you can naturally understand. So participation is the one and commitment's the other. Now, participation is quite easy. We can just look at the stats and we can see how well or how often you've been playing. So many games after so many games, how much balls you're facing per game. The stats is endless. So we can see how much contribution you're making from a participatory point of view. That's easy. That's a tangible expression, right? Whereas also we can see in reverse how little participation you are contributing, right? You're not really getting game time. You're sitting on the bench, you're traveling, whatever. You're not really you're just in the nets. You're just constantly doing your hard yards, gym, training. You're not playing, right? Or if you are in the game and you're chosen in the 11, your contribution in the game is not as substantial. So you're only bowling 2 overs. You're hardly batting. You're supposed to be a finisher, but you're batting too late. You're supposed to be maybe promoted high up in the order, whatever it is. So we can measure that participation, positive or negative. And likewise, the commitment side of it, the other end. Commitment is more difficult because how do we assess how committed we are? All we can say is, look, that game, the guy his head is not in the game, and lots of terminology we can use. We can see like he's checked out, or he's not giving any hoot, he's not caring. He's tossing his wicket, he's giving it up, whatever it is, or he lost his head. He's taking a big shot on me. He should actually be a little bit more, committed to the team, playing for the cause, whatever it is. So that there is too abstract, and we haven't tend to have a measurement for that. But there is a measurement that, even though it's an intangible commitment, there is a measurement. So as you look at the grid, you'll see the grid as you put it up, right? That there are, I don't know if you want to pause at any point, just feel free to just kind of give me a signal and I'll pause, right? But if you look at the components on the bottom end of this grid of component, there is 4 levels of commitment. So we start off obviously in absolute ignorance, and we progress to awareness. That's the first stage of a sense of commitment, how aware we are of what is required. Then we move to a deeper understanding of what's required and our commitment as relation to that. And then we move further where we're truly far more engaged in the game, right? Where we feel like we have switched on and we've come alive. And then lastly, it's when you reach a peak of performance. And that's what we call ultimate performance, kind of the goal set or the objective of where we're wanting to be from a performance orientation, right? So those are the 3 levels. So it goes from ignorance to awareness, understanding, engagement, and then commitment. So we can ask any player now if those are the kind of stepping stones towards what we ultimately want, which is commitment at the far end. Where do you think you are? Self-assess, and me looking at the outside as a coach can say, I actually think you're only here in the understanding phase. You're not even engaged, or you engage, but you're not fully committed. You're just doing enough. You're just about, doing what we can see is required, but not going above and beyond type of thing. So those are the four kind of stepping stones of commitment. And that often is difficult to assess if you didn't have that breakdown. Now the breakdown is there, the modality is there. It's an easy thing to plot yourself on where you are. And you'll have peer feedback. If you're doing it in the right spirit, obviously, you'll have peer feedback that can say, I actually think I should challenge and put a question mark on that. I think you don't understand where you are. You have no sense of awareness of what you do here and how you should be contributing. So therefore, you kind of feel at odds. So that's just the scope, on the explain.
Yeah. So I think let's take a pause there with your explanation for a moment. So I've got sort of 3 notes that I made. Yeah. Firstly, I remembered my question.
Sure.
So when we speak of this idea of ownership, right? And maybe I'm going to rewind a little bit now, and I hope it doesn't affect the conversation too much, but I think it was an important enough question that I will ask it again. And I have a sense of what my answer is to it. But what is the difference for you between, if we talk about ownership, right? I think it could be easy for coaches and athletes to think, oh yeah, to get everybody to buy in, right? That's ownership. How do we get everybody to buy in? We go Kumbaya, like you and I speak about it, right? We go do a little braai out there. We go do a little braai. We take a 3-day retreat away from things, and then we come back, and now we all part of this, And I'm sure your thinking doesn't sit in the same place. So what is the difference between your understanding of ownership and how it might look and feel versus say something like that? That's just a Kumbaya.
Yeah, firstly, I think the whole Kumbaya thing is an awesome thing. So you get the rapport and you get an opportunity to connect with others in a non-threatening or non-hierarchical, right? A space where you're a little bit more safer and you can resonate with individuals. So you get that heart-to-heart type of connection, and therefore you can kind of go into battle together. You know what I mean? You can go and maybe fight for a cause together when it comes down to being in the middle together. So it's an essential component. But if those decision makers have put this Kumbaya together purely to make you feel kind of comfortable with each other so that the objective is just to purely get performances out of you, then it's a form of manipulation in a way. It's a kind of a means to an end. I must pay this money for this good time to get these things out of you, right? It's not really a resonance that's deep-seated, that's sincere. And I think the whole idea is, if you're talking about being professional, we shouldn't need the Kumbaya in order to get the performance. The performance is contractually, you signed up for it, but you need to be able to find a deeper meaning within yourself individually, and then understand what the deeper meaning or purpose or objective is of the team and why you've collaborated or joined that team contractually, and then find that resonance. So we're finding the relationship as a result of getting the result. We're finding the connection, the relationship as a result of what we're pursuing, right? We're coming in together for a purpose. We're not just coming in for a good time. We're coming in together for a purpose, and I will play my part and my role in that to achieve that. So that needs to be clarified when you go into these spaces. It's not just a laugh and a giggle and a fun time and what I can get out of it or what the team can get out of it in terms of forcing the performance out of me, but finding a resonance, finding a real relationship that we've come together for a particular cause on this occasion, and we really want to connect around that so that it makes it meaningful for us as we engage and maybe hopefully accomplish the thing that we've set out for. So that for me is the main thing around it. I'm not sure if I'm answering you fully, but that's my first impression of the sense of ownership.
No, I think the difference there would be the intention with which you go into it, right? So I think I might be wrong, but my sense is a lot of the time teams in South Africa that I've been involved with, they go away. Players sort of see it as a bit of a waste of time. I've got better things to do. And I think if you go into it with that already, it shows that it's being done for the wrong reasons. Because what you're explaining, and I agree with this fully, is that we are going here for a reason. It's not just a kumbaya. It's not just like, let's just go sing a song, feel better, and off we go. It's part of my job to make sure that, maybe let me say it like this. I'm always fascinated by you take rugby as an example, and in the past it was the New Zealand team. You would read a book and it would say we have these team meetings, regular team meetings around specific things about how they want to show up, about how they want to be, about not just tactics. And I always got the sense when I read those books that those people are fully invested in that. And I think we see a similar thing with the South African rugby team. You know, we see these little videos on social media where Rassie is sort of speaking with the players and they're sort of engaging. And I'm sure it's not just always him speaking. I suppose he's a bit of a figurehead and they like putting his words out there for people. But my sense is that's not how it is. But those team meetings, the players look very engaged in them. They look very much like they're when you see it, they don't look like they're drifting, you know, their eyes are front. They're there with purpose. And I think at times the cricket space, I can't speak for all around the world. I haven't been in all these places all around the world, but I get a sense because our focus is so at times so much just on technical ability. You know, if you've got the technical ability, you play. This is part of why you and I are having these conversations, right? Because we're trying to highlight the fact that these other elements, which are super important, are often neglected and missed and not seen and not engaged with. And there are these attempts at times to engage with them, but maybe coaches, executives, whatever, they maybe miss the mark on some things. They're not sort of nailing it down for the exact reason that you want to be having these things and the way in which you want to be having them. So, yeah. My next, just an observation. So around the participation, you spoke about only like we measure on-field stuff, but I'm sure from a participation point of view, if we think of champion teaming, there would be off-the-field things too that we could measure. In other words, how often do you share your thoughts and opinion in a team meeting? Like that's something that can be measured, right? We've had 5 team meetings now and we haven't heard a single word from you. Are you really contributing? Is this really yours? Is that how you are with things when it's yours, that you're very hands off and you sit back and you're happy for other people to just tell you how to be and what to do? As one example, I'm sort of thinking of pretty quickly. I'm not sure if that's part of your model necessarily, but I would imagine that if I think about it, participation wouldn't just be on the field. If we talk about a team, it would be off the field stuff too. You know, how encouraging are you? When you're down, do you still support those around you, or are you just the miserable one walking around you? Because is that how we participate in this team? As another example, and I suppose there's a whole lot more that you can throw in there and unpack, you know. I'm going to sort of say my last thing and maybe you can comment on it all. The last one was just the idea of the commitment versus, you know, I like the sort of steps that you gave there. It was, I can't remember the first one, and then it was awareness, and then was engagement, and then commitment.
Yeah, it's ignorance. It starts off
ignorance. Yeah, I knew it started with an I. I knew it started with an I. Ignorance, awareness. So I like those sort of steps. And so I'm wondering if you can maybe just highlight some more. What's the difference between somebody being committed and say somebody just being busy and they have like high intensity and they're running around like a crazy person? They bring good energy, but they might not yet be committed. Or does that good energy mean they are committed? Maybe if you could just sort of comment.
Yeah, firstly, let me say, I'm going to comment on that. That's a perfect question, actually. The first one you mentioned, the off-field participation is so critical. You can actually measure how engaged people are going to be on the field as a result of their off-field scenario. We had a situation, I mentioned this directly example of it, where I felt like, you know, we played the MSL final, you know, at Paul. And in that, I saw the effect of the consistent participation of this individual that scored the Player of the Match award was off the field. And it came through his performances on the field. He actually won the game for us in terms of batting, right? He chased down, I'm talking about Henry Davids here as an example. But he consistently was tasked to go and visit schools. And these are all kind of ad hoc things around Paul. Now, obviously, we know he's from there, so it you know, kind of felt a lot more meaningful for him to do that. But those sort of participatory stuff led to his performances to be so much more enhanced, so much more fulfilling. Right? So it kind of leads into it where we would have normally seen that participation as a little bit of a chore and a little bit something that's actually derailing the potential of this guy or any player from achieving. So those things play a part in a positive way if we do it right. And that's the main thing about it. So it kind of leads into this next question, which you're saying, where someone is actually very much doing all the stuff right, but the commitment is not fully there. So they're doing it for the sake of doing it. It's required of me contractually. I can't say no to it. I must take these photos. I must show up at these occurrences. In actual fact, maybe it's just extra money for me. All of these type of things come through. But if I'm not fully committed to the ultimate end of what it really is, like what is the deeper or the bigger benefit for this? How can I take it to another level? I will be engaged to some extent. I'll have an understanding of what's required. Those are the levels. But I will only participate or be committed from those angles. But someone who is overcommitted, who actually commits over and above, will go the extra mile. And those are the type of things where you're going again, full committed and fully participatory, but also fully committed. And now you're seriously up and to the right, and you're a true champion on and off the field. And so those are the type of things that plays itself out when you understand these dynamics and where you are kind of authentically, you can assess yourself and people can point a mirror and hold a mirror to you and say, look, don't be pretending that you're there because this is what it is. So look at it. We now know if we defined it out like this and we can call it out in you. And by the way, this goes for beyond the players, right? We can actually go to coaches as well. We can say to coaches, where are you on this? Because are you doing the bare minimum? You coming here, late for training or unprepared, or do you have strategies in place? How committed are you to the game? How much research have you done? Whatever it is, so everyone gets affected by this. This applies to both the player and the coach or anyone involved in the game that's contributing. That for me is a nice, easy measurement, a modality that you can actually look into and you can self-assess and allow other people's input as well, which allows the sense of growth and progression, right? But I mean, if I highlight the participatory side of it, which is it's easier to relate to, it might make it a little bit more sense, and you can see where the categories fit in, and you can put up the image again so that it's easier for everyone to follow along with.
Yeah. So maybe just before you go into that, I just have one comment, right? And I have this understanding that, and I'm sort of getting a different sense of it here, just as we're talking about this, that I know from the things I studied that when we can bring meaningfulness into performance, right? Then when we can bring meaningfulness into performance, then normally that's better for us. Okay. However, some meaning becomes too much. I had a conversation with a client last week and we spoke a lot about the weight on the shoulders, right? And so I think we can bring a meaningfulness to competition that's too much on our shoulders or the shoulders of a team. And I think when we make that meaning, I think you and I have we've thrashed this out, but when we bring that meaningfulness through performance, right? We have to win something. We have to, I have to score runs from a cricket point of view. I have to go take wickets. I have to put in a performance so I can have a career so that I'm just thinking I'm working with 3 or 4 clients through the same sort of, there's very much the similar stuff at this point in time. And so when we carry that as our meaningfulness, that brings a weight on the shoulder. But I love the example you give of Henry Davids, that he brought in meaningfulness that actually brings a lightness to the shoulders, that actually empowers the shoulders. It lifts the shoulders up, I think. And that meaningfulness is a meaningfulness beyond me. And so I feel like when teams can understand this idea and concept, so if we're going to arrive for a purpose, if that purpose can be something that is beyond you, beyond the team, then I think we're bringing a meaningfulness that's not heavy, that doesn't drag us down, that doesn't sit in a place where it will deteriorate performance. It sits in a place where it can enhance performance, where it can get the best out of you, where it can be like a higher purpose that you play for, versus if you do not. And so just to maybe bring this then back to the conversation on ownership, is if a team doesn't own or feel a sense of ownership, or if an individual arrives and they don't feel a sense of ownership, then I think we're always going to fight for the self and the ego first, which is things you and I have spoken about as well. We fight for the self and we fight for the ego. But when I feel a sense of ownership, then it's like I don't have to come from a place of me anymore. I can come from a place of give. It's all these little pieces that you and I have sort of spoken about in these conversations so far that my head is maybe just pulling together a little bit. And I thought it's maybe just important to, I don't know if you'd agree with me, but I feel like that's maybe a nice summary of all of our conversations we've had so far, because we've touched on relationships, we've touched on the ego, we've touched on the meaningfulness. And so, like I'm hoping, so if people want more on each of those, they can go listen to all the other conversations if this is the first one they find. But it's sort of a nice way to start seeing how these puzzle pieces fit together, right? And they fit very well together with my understanding of what gets the best out of people, and it's not the things that put weight on our shoulders. It's more the things that get our chests puffed out, not arrogance, but, we puff out because we have a sense of, I'm doing this for something bigger. I've got a bigger cause that I'm fighting for. Yeah. And I think if you don't have ownership in that, then the spine crumbles. It's easy for the spine to bend. You need a strong spine to stand up tall to say, right, we're doing this thing and it's beyond us, right? It's got nothing to do with us, but also not to the extent where, because I think you could take the South African cricket team, they've sort of placed a lot of, we're doing this for South Africa. And I think that is not a meaningful, that's a weight that team carries, trying to do it for other people in that way. And I'm not too sure if that's the best fit yet. To do it for a whole nation, for 60 million people, that's a lot of weight to carry. I don't know if that's the higher purpose meaningfulness yet for that team. I think they've still got to find it. My take.
Yeah, wonderful. I think it is a nice summary, and it's stuff that we have spoken about before. It's beautiful that it comes strongly through what we're talking about here. I think the concept of what you're referring to, the heaviness versus the lightness, right? It stems from the low level frequencies of desires that we were speaking about a couple of podcasts ago, and versus the high level, right? If you're coming from a high level, you feel that liberation, that sense of lightness. So you let go of all those things. And now the nice thing, I think it's a nice little entry point for me to say this. The ownership concept that this thing gets wrapped up with is this, actually, and this is a very strong statement to say. Ownership, actually, this thing points to owning outcomes. So I know this is going to be a weighty statement, right? It's owning the outcome. So no one can possibly say that you're going to guarantee wins. But what this ownership thing does do, the modality, is that we can clearly say that we're going to get the outcome that we intended for. If we truly go through our paces here and do a self-assessment and actually be mature about this. So outcomes in itself is a guarantee if you take ownership here. That's what we're talking about. So we're talking about it like you talked about the reference to the South African World Cup. If you're talking about owning the outcome of winning a World Cup, this will guarantee that outcome. Because even in the word outcomes, it's split in two words, out and comes. What comes out is what you put in. How much ownership do you have internally and through your expression can you therefore take out? What comes out? That's your outcomes. And if you put in a champion on the inside, then you should be getting this cup on the outside. It should manifest. It shouldn't be a surprise, which is exactly what Henry David's done in his experience. Therefore, it was a light. I've got the cup on the inside of me already. I'm already a winner. And that's what we've been echoing all the time. So even if you look at own, for instance, the word own, W-N. Own, if you flip the letters around, it speaks about one, W-O-N. We've already won. It's done. It's in the past. As soon as you own something, you've already won. And the other component, which you would also understand, and we can speak for days into this area, is if we flip the letters around again, it speaks about now. It's about playing in the now, playing fully present, being your full self, bring your full component of yourself, fully committed and fully participatory, up and to the right, and that's where your champion lies, right? So it's almost it's a owning of the outcomes when you go through this ownership modality. So it's a perfect illustration.
Yeah, I love that. I love all of that. It's perfect. It's brilliant because I think it speaks to everything that you and I've spoken about, that we resonate on. And yes, maybe at times our language around certain things is a little bit different, and maybe we use slightly different models to inform our understanding. But at the end of the day, that's the beauty of this, that there's not just one approach, but the core, or the sort of, what do you call it? The thing that underpins it all is the same for everyone. The foundational principle, I think, is similar, irrespective of what model you use. It'll come down to this idea around, as you speak, the ownership, taking responsibility for things is what we spoke about before. So that would be owning the outcome. It's our outcome. And I love this idea. There's this famous quote, like, give somebody a leadership position and you'll see their true colors. Sort of, that's what it alludes to. And so that's sort of what you're speaking about. Whatever you've put in under pressure, in the moment, in the now, that is going to come out. And so if you have a team, any team that is, right? Look beyond the South African cricket team. Take the South African rugby team. Take the New Zealand rugby team. Take a sport like Formula One. Take golf. It doesn't matter. You put people under that pressure. And if there's somebody that consistently cracks, if you play golf for 10 years and you're always in the top 10, but you never win and you always fail in a similar way, then that says something about what's inside. It is the expression of what's internal. And I love your message there that only when you really start paying attention to what's inside and how you deal with that. And I hate the words deal with that because it sounds so like it's something that you can, it's like these levers that you can pull. And a lot of it's not levers that you can pull. It's concepts, it's ideas, it's perceptions that you've got. Sorry?
How you relate to it.
Yeah, and how you relate to those things and how you make sense of it and how you embody it and then how you express it. That is the work at times for individuals and teams to go through. I think a lot of the time, I know we spoke about culture, but I think a lot of the time culture is just assumed. So because the South African rugby team now wins, they've got a great culture. Well, it's assumed they'll always be like that. Well, if they'll always be like that, why aren't New Zealand still winning everything? Because not too long ago, for about an 8 to 10 year period, they were dominating world rugby. Why isn't West Indies cricket still dominating? Why isn't the Australian cricket just, well, it's debatable because they tend to dominate, but they're definitely not dominating like they did in the late 90s and early 2000s. They're not dominating world cricket like that. Indian cricket are finding a little bit of a wave. South African cricket is a little bit on the up, yet they're still stumbling a little bit. And so I think this is something that we've got to understand, that as people change, every time a new person comes into a team, the dynamic shifts. And so there's a continuous thing that needs attention, that needs focus, not in a, hey, you've got to come sit now and do this work sort of way. I think part of this is the ownership to do this work. Like we're owning the fact that we've got to look within to get those results on the outside. And if we're not looking within and we only seek the results on the outside, well, then you'll keep getting what you're getting.
Yep. I think it plays into even in the modality it experiences. You have a breakdown of the zoning. If you talk about this quadrant, if you look at the quadrant again, there's this frustration zone and the comfort zone. And we haven't really unpacked the participation yet. But when you're fully committed and you're consistently going down this deepened path of I'm committed to the cause of winning this cup, but because you don't actually participate well, right? Because your commitment hasn't increased in terms of maturity, that creates a frustration and it leads to major stress. And this is where you're scratching your head and you don't know what to do in terms of winning this World Cup. But that's the frustration zone because you haven't gone through this mechanism of this slither of up and to the right, which is what you want to take steps towards. And the ultimate steps is towards this champion, the inner champion and therefore the external champion. So you remain in this comfort zone here because you're fully committed. You're doing all these things, but you're not hitting the objective or not achieving the outcomes that we're saying. Take ownership internally. So you're not doing it correctly. And you factored out these subtle soft skills as not important. And therefore you don't hit those prizes, right? Because you're not ready to receive it. You're not ready to receive it, to be honest.
Yeah.
So,
yeah. So so you say there we haven't unpacked the participation sort of part. What more would we need to understand about that?
No, they also have levels of understanding in a sense, right? So just a similar vein again, because it's XY quadrant, you still start on ignorance when it comes to participation because you don't know quite how you fit in, right? You're still ignorant of what this team requires from you. So you stay there until the coach kind of slots you in and positions you. You know what your gifting is and why you may have been chosen based on skills, but in this team, what is required of you? So there's still this passive nature, which is the next step. And then you get a sense of like passively just part of the team, but not knowing exactly where you slot in, where you would be required to fit in. Then you kind of subscribe or given a role. Then you're reactive to that. Go open the batting for us or take first change or whatever it is. You're going to be our keeper for the year or backup keeper or whatever it is. You react, right? And then there's an active stage where you know where you fit in, you know what you're all about. You actively engage in the process of your role and your assignment within this makeup of the team, and you play that part in it. I need to take the bowling on in the up front, or I need to be rotating the strike, or I need to limit, whatever it is, right? I need to limit, take strike bowler or limit the runs, or whatever it is. And then lastly, the proactive nature, where you take the lead proactively and you determine the team needs to go in this direction. So then proactively, I participate in the game. I need to progress the team proactively to another level. So those are the 4 levels. So it's passive, reactive, active, and proactive. Those are kind of the 4 levels, of participation. And again, those are kind of self-explanatory, but in terms of team dynamics, coaches are not necessarily looking out for that and seeing who's inactive and who's standing passively, or who's on the bench but ready to go, who understands how they can fit in, because now they'll just swap a player out and presume that players are ready. We had this scenario in MSL as well, the one we won, where we had a Carl Varane, a youngster, or Sips Makanya. These guys were on the bench ready to go because we made sure that they understand they stay proactive when they get into it. They're not going to, where do I slot in? Can I just do the best so that I can stay in the team? No, they're going to take the team over the line. They're going to be proactive, or at least be ready for when the opportunity comes, right? And that's often what coaches would say. I'm just as strong as my bench players, right? Because someone like these musicians, I'm saying it wrong, I tend to mispronounce this, your magical managers. So Alec Ferguson used Olagai Solskjaer, what's the guy's name, as a striker back
I
in
have
the
no
day. You don't
idea.
know football.
I have no idea.
Olagai. So anyway, he used to use it. This is way back, I think in the 90s. You used to use him as a strike. So you used to come in at the last 5 minutes of the game and purely just win the game in those last 5 minutes. When the opposition is worn down, the defense is down, he came in as a striker and just nailed 2 in the back of the nets, and game is won. So, I mean, those are the type of things, is as strong as his bench players are and they're ready to go, right? So those are the type of situations where we're saying you're ready to participate in a clear, articulated fashion. And you're actually ready whether you're participating or not, or when we release you at the right time. The conditions now suit the spinner, you in for it, and you understand where the team is in relation to what's required for the competition or the campaign or whatever it is. Those sorts of things. But you can see how those things play out. So if you look at what we spoke about, the zoning aspect, if you're just participating but you're not committed, you can also understand, then you'll have a sense of apathy, which is this comfort zone. You are comfort zoning consistently in teams. They get into a space of apathy where their name is first on the list. They're guaranteed to play every single game. And this is what teams tend to do. Your coaches will say, I'm going to keep my 11. And it's only when certain people get injured or they lose a little bit of shape of form do I drop X amount of play and then the next guy comes in. So they keep that core. But those players can get into a comfort zone and they can get sent kind of participating, but they get apathy, and that comfort zone starts negatively affecting. And that comfort zone of those players can have a bad influence on the rest of the guys who are not actually kept alive in terms of these, the quadrant components, right?
Oh, yeah,
So
yeah.
that plays stuff out.
Yeah, I think of Rassi, like I saw a stat last year, something like 50 different individuals played. I don't know if 50 is the exact number, but it was in that sort of range, played for the Springboks. Like, that's a lot. That is a lot of people that have played for one team. Now you think of the English cricket team of the past. They also had a lot of people play, but they were not that great. So I think at that time they were trying to find the great ones. They were like, okay, you come play. Let's see if you're good enough. Okay, no, you're not. Okay, you come play. Let's see if you're good enough. That's almost the sense I got. Where with Rassi's team, I more get the sense it's like, we're giving people opportunity because they're all good enough in some way, and it fits maybe more with this model that you're talking about, where it keeps everybody sharp because there is actually somebody chomping at my heels here, So if I'm the best in the world, well, I can be replaced and I could have somebody else take my place and they could be just as good, or they could play a role that's similar to mine, maybe a little different because they're unique, but so I've got to make sure that I stay sharp if I really want that, and if I don't, well, then that system will most probably kick you out very, very quickly and say, okay, cool, you're not the guy, they're the guy. And who's the guy that's now chomping at their heels? So I like that. I think if teams can get to that space. Wow.
And here's a framework for them to do that. I mean, it's not like it's undefined. It's not like it's plucking it out of the air. There's a set modality that you can follow and basically stepping stones towards a success.
Yeah, I was going to say, it gives you the next step. It gives you're able to identify where am I actually at and what is our next step and how do we make sure that we get there? Right? Because I think then that can also become a way in which you can clearly communicate to everybody within the team. about what you're doing, why you're doing it, where we're going, etc., etc. Instead of it being something that I'm thumb sucking, well, here's a model, here's something that we're using to guide our understanding about where we're going.
Yeah. And the nice thing about this is our work, right? Whether you're coming in as an individual, when you're kind of assisting an individual slot into a team dynamic, or whether you're focusing on engaging with the team, right? There's these phases of development. So even if you look at this modality, right, the grid itself again, you'll see that the team allows you to go through different components. So individually, I might be high on participatory but low on commitment, or the other way around, high on commitment but low on participatory, right? But I can still see where I slot in terms of the phases of the team. So this is more the team, but where I need to do my work to fit better into the team space. So let's assume if you look at the phases here, the phases are there's competency, which is the lower level, right? We go from being competent as a team to now a contributor towards the team, right? We're contributors within this team. There's a whole bunch of us. So that's different phases, it's stepping stones. And then we move to a more collaborative space, right? That's the third one. And then lastly, the hitting the peak, the top and to the right, which is the champion. That's the ideal outcome. The champion team, where we become unstoppable. And you keep referring to the rugby. So the rugby is like that in that space now, where there's full commitment and full participation by 50 members and fully committed by all members speaking engagingly or committedly, to the public. So that's where they are. They're like a champion team. You know what I mean? And that's the phases of development, really. So that's the ideal. That's champion teaming.
So I would, yeah, with ownership, I would imagine. So it was competent, then it was collaborator.
First contributor. First, you have
contributor,
a level of,
then collaborator. Yeah.
yeah.
I mean, I'm thumb sucking, right? But I like doing these sort of things in my head because it's a model and we can gauge. We're not in that environment, so we don't know. We've had a lot of conversations about it, but I would imagine that the South African team is maybe somewhere between, they're definitely all competent, but they must probably be somewhere between the collaborator and the contributor. Yeah, they must probably, I'd imagine that they're somewhere in between there.
Yeah, definitely. And there's phases as well. So depending, look, the team is made up of, I think there's another quote that I once read. The team is basically made up of the amount of individuals in the team contributing, right? As in, you're only as strong as your teammates, right? That's in the team. I'm going to try and see if I can locate that direct quote at some point. But it's a really, it speaks to what you've just been saying now,
Yeah.
Oh, here it is.
Yeah.
The strength of the team is each individual member, and the strength of each member is the team. So it goes both ways, right?
Yeah.
So as a result of it, if you think about it, the South African team is a lot of the time, depending on where they are in the competition or how, as you said, how pressured they're feeling by the outcome, because they haven't done the investment, right? So they wane on their level of commitment as the competition gets more to the pressure end. So they go lower and lower instead of going higher. So they go from collaborating well in the very beginning towards contributing and then lower down towards competent again. But they lose the level of competency. And therefore their participation is very much nullified in a way. They kind of like what we call choked in the experience of it. But those are the phases. So instead of them going up into the right, they actually drifting downward with pressure because of the contributions of individuals in the team. So if, for instance, what's this guy's name? Quentin de Kock doesn't get him off to a flyer. They feel the pressure. Now, our one banker guy, our collaborator, is lost, and now we need to make a major play. But now we haven't worked on that. So we kind of wane down towards we don't have the competency to take us over the line type of thing, Or if the best player, one of the best players nowadays, Heinrich Klaassen doesn't get us the runs, then we're not going to get over the line. You know what I mean? Or, those sorts of things, whatever it is.
Yeah.
So those are the things.
It seems like even if David Miller gets the runs, it's not happening. Unfortunately for him and the team.
Exactly.
Finds himself in those situations quite a lot. Yeah, I'm reminded of this idea. So I just Googled it very quickly. So it says the phrase greater than the sum of its parts means that a whole entity, like a team or system, is more effective or valuable than the sum of its individual parts would suggest, often due to synergy or emergent properties. And so I'd imagine if we're just collaborators or competent, it's more like the individual. Your skill, your ability. We're not sort of where collaboration says, okay, we're starting to work together, And then a champion means like it's those emergent properties that we're actually allowing, say, those things to now come to the fore. It's greater than what we achieve is greater than what all of us can do, as individuals together. there's something unique that happens when these bunch of individuals become essentially like a oneness, then the real magic happens.
And that's the artistry of doing teaming this way, because you've got to be able to find and pull the best out of it, kind of nudge them into a sense of ownership individually, but also collectively as a team. That's the
Yeah.
artistry of coaching.
Yes.
In a sense.
Yes,
So if you think about here's the dynamic that's at play here, what people don't realize, if you look at this modality again, unless you reach collaborator, right? The first three, a competent, contributor, and collaborator, all three of those phases, if you are lucky enough to get through those phases, you are still a contract worker, which means I'm still earning a salary. I'm not living beyond that. I'm still owning a salary and I'm working for an outcome. So I haven't actually transcended over into ownership. Ownership is only in the champion space. So when we talk about maturity, we're talking about going through the process of getting to a sense of ownership. It can only happen when you realize yourself as an internal champion and collectively a team champion. And that's what you have to hit. So if you're on those other 2-3 planes, if you want to call it, or phases, you are still just a contractor. You're still just coming there, exchanging your time and skill for a resource, for a reciprocation somehow. And you haven't really moved into this transcendent space of being a champion, which means you're playing for something beyond yourself and you've superseded your capacity individually. You've now gone into a co-created space where collectively that magic happens.
Yeah. And I mean, for that to happen, my head just thinks there's a whole bunch of stuff that could interfere with that, right? There's a whole bunch of stuff that can derail that. And I think we've touched on quite a lot of that in our conversations. However, my sense is there would be things that you and I haven't even speak about that could be very unique to every team and every individual, the things that actually interfere with their ability to be at their best as individuals and collectively. Yeah. Russell, I'm mindful of the time, and I know we want to keep these short, right?
Yeah, it's too late for that.
Yeah, it's too late for that. It's too late for that. I'm more and more sort of in my own understanding and in my own head making sense of, through these conversations with you and other guests on the podcast, I'm becoming more and more familiar with in my own sense about, what a formula for performance could be. Right. Not saying that there's one singular one, but I feel like I'm getting my head around an understanding of what that actually means, right? Like, how do we get to be at our best? And I think I've alluded to it in other conversations. And so for me, my summary of this conversation actually fits beautifully into my understanding of what my sense of what a formula is, right? And I think the ownership conversation just adds to it. It fits into like a bit of a category. So for me, performance is equal to your ability to be at your best. And this would be specifically if I only think of the mental side of the game, right? The internal space, your ability to be at your best, to be in your optimal, as I refer to it, your optimal condition, right? Your mental environment is another word that I've seen people speak about, your inner game, right? That part to be at its best, show up as it's all with all the potential it has to show up as that. I think when athletes show up with that, they have the freedom, they have that sense of expression, they have that sense of lightness, they liberate it as yours, maybe in your language. However, there's things that interfere with that, right? So I say performance is equal ability to be in that space times the interference. There's things that derail that. There's things that take away from that. Over pressure, because pressure is a natural part of the game. I don't refer to as pressure as the self-created pressure. I think that's an interference. I'm more talking about the natural pressures in the game. And I feel like this conversation has sort of played into all of those little parts, right? It's, if we have complete ownership as a team, we can show up as the best version of ourselves. We do the work to make sure there's nothing interfering. And most of the time to manage pressure is about a presence, to get into the now and to be clear on what you're paying attention to. And so, yeah, I thank you for contributing another segment, in my mind to the formula, to my formula. And it's certainly, I think, something that's very, very valuable and very important to consider from a performance point of view. As all of our conversations are, like, my awareness was like, oh, there's these little steps that we're building here, and I can see them puzzling together. So, yeah. Thank you for that. I've enjoyed this conversation.
I think one of the major contributions that I would have brought into the space from your performance formula point of view was the teaming aspect. This whole thing on the fly type of thing, and how that plays into what you're talking about, right? So my interest has always been to say we have those things playing itself out, but as we change the way teams work, we change the way how teams work, right? So how they operate, and then everything at the end of the day that changes the whole dynamic. So it kind of interplays both ways. So thanks very much for your contribution as well, just for the curiosity of trying to put together that formula that can guide us in a way. So thanks for that,
Yeah.
Jody.
No, awesome. Thank you. And I'll see you soon and we continue this conversation.
For sure.
Yeah. Even if it takes us a month, we'll get there.
For sure.
Yeah.
Cheers, Jody.
Thanks, Russell.
Thank you.
Cool, man. Cheers. Bye.
Bye.